Hi there, my name is Sean McGeever, and I work for Young Life here in Phoenix, Arizona. I also teach in the College of Theology at Grand Canyon University. One of the things that I teach Young Life leaders and those at GCU is how to interpret the Bible. I teach classes on hermeneutics, exegesis, biblical interpretation, and one of the things that I'm asked to do and that students really enjoy is learning how to look into the original languages to be able to do word studies and understand the Bible better in its original setting. So what I've done is I've put together 3 brief videos to show you the real basics about how you could jump into that. The first video, the first part, is going to just lay the foundation. The second part is going to show you how to get online and use some free resources to dig in. And then the third one is just going to be an example about how you could get more out of it. So we're just going to jump right in. When it comes to original language word studies, the basic foundations that you need to know is that first off, we need to understand the original language text. Second, we need to understand the different English translations that we might be using. And third, I'm going to give you 3 guardrails in order for you to stay on track. So here we go. First off, when it comes to the original language text, it's important to know that there is only one copy that existed at any point in time of the original. That's called the autograph, the self-writing. If you could just imagine perhaps Paul writing on papyrus, writing on his, with his original pen, and writing that down. There's only one copy of that. And for all of the biblical documents, we don't have those. So what we have to do is to rely upon copies. So with the autographs, they don't exist. And in fact, it might be that Paul wasn't the one that wrote it down. We know from different places in Scripture and Romans that Paul used a secretary, or that Peter also used perhaps someone to write this down for them. But we don't have those. And so what we do have is the next best choice after that, which are copies and copies and copies. We have lots of copies throughout history. And those are called manuscripts. Now, scholars have worked together to put together the best resource of the collection of copies. And they keep updating it as they find new copies, but it's really solidified. There's one for the Old Testament, the Biblia Hebraica Studentgartensia. Then there is one for the New Testament in Greek, with the Nessa Lalande, the current version, or the United Bible Society, the UBS. Now, what these scholars have done, you don't need to worry about it, but they've worked hard to be able to produce, with all of the manuscripts that exist in the world, a final edition of the original text in Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. And that's what we're going to do our best to try to look at so we can understand what was written originally. In order to do so, we have to start in English because we speak English. So you need to know a little bit about English translations. There are 3 basic approaches to translating, and here are the 3. First off, there's what's called formal equivalence. Now this is as much as possible to be able to just take an original word and have the English translation of that word, and then we're just going to line those up as clear and without as minimal manipulation as possible for it to make sense. A good example of that would be the NASB or the ESV. This is called a word-for-word translation. The next step, just to help it out a little bit, is called dynamic equivalence. And what they do is they once again look at the original language, but then they're going to try to smooth it out just a little bit so that it makes a little bit of sense. It might add in a couple extra words that really weren't there in the original language that are required in English for it to flow a little bit more smoothly. Or if there's a word that really doesn't have an equivalent, today they're going to try to use modern words or a combination of words or maybe even a phrase or so to be able to communicate the same idea. A good example of that would be the NIV or the NLT, a thought-for-thought translation. The last one is what's called a paraphrase. And what this does is, once again, it looks at the original languages. That shouldn't be missed. Yet the aim for a thought-for-thought or a paraphrase translation would be to capture the idea, perhaps maybe a bit of a commentary to make it refreshing, new. It's okay if we add a whole bunch of words that aren't in the original text as long as the idea is the same. And an example of that would be the message. So now that we know a little bit about those, we're going to dial in and talk about which one would be good for a word study. Well, to be honest, we want to stay away from the paraphrase because there's a lot of words in there that if you go, where can I find that original word? It just might not be there. Similarly, if you look at an NIV or an NLT, it might be that a particular word that you're looking for has been inserted by the translation team. And while it might be helpful, you're not going to find underlying word which it represents. Because of that, we want to focus on word-for-word translations. And so we're going to look at translations in English like the NASB and the ESV. If you had an interlinear, which is right where it has the original language word like the Greek word and the best translation for the English word right next to it, you could use that. But a lot of us don't have that. So I'm going to say use the NASB or the ESV. Now, as far as 3 guardrails to keep you on track, the first one, and by far the most important, is context. Always keep context in mind. So when we're looking at a word, and I'll show you in the next video about how to find what's called the range of meaning, all the different definitions that you might come up with, we need to make sure that we let context dictate what the meaning of the word is, more than maybe a bunch of dictionaries that we look into, or some remote kind of abstract ideas which might be true, but not contextually true. So what we do is we focus on how the word is used in its, in the sentence, in the paragraph, with the closest proximity. So, for example, if we were to look up the word, let's say love in Luke, well, the best way to understand how Luke uses the word love is to look at how Luke uses the word. So if we're looking in the Gospel of Luke, we would maybe look in that paragraph, in that chapter, in the Gospel of Luke, and that's where we really want to focus on how does Luke use this word. Then we might say, oh wait, I remember Luke also wrote the book of Acts. Does Luke ever use that word in the book of Acts? Great. Okay, there's my information. Now I say, okay, I know what Luke thinks of the word love. What about Paul? What about the Apostle John? What about some of the other biblical writers in the same language? Greek. It would be a mistake to say, oh yeah, now I'm going to jump right into some Old Testament examples. Those are different languages. And while advanced scholars can start to draw connections between those, at this stage, avoid that and maybe rely on other resources to help you with that. The second part is to focus on the original meaning. Now, just remember, those words were not written today. They're written a long time ago. So what we don't want to do is start with the English translation. I teach and grade lots of papers on this topic, and I know I can spot it a mile away when I see that in the first paragraph, one of my students is discussing the Webster's Dictionary definitions of the word. That's to think about how to do a word study completely backward. That is to say, if you start with all of the English modern options of what a word can mean, you're talking about what the word means today. What we want to do is look back then and understand what are the options about how they understood it then. Then when we've done all the hard work, we can then come to what are the words in our modern language which then best correspond to the original language. So we want to focus on the original meaning. An example too would be words that kind of took on additional meanings. So for example, there's a Greek word, dunamis. It means like power. And you'll hear it in sermons and all sorts of things where someone will say something like the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. Well, they'll say the word for power is dunamis, and it means dynamite. And that means that the gospel is the dynamite. And that's to make a major mistake, which is to take something dynamite, which we have an idea about, that was only really formed in the last, 100, 200 years since we've had dynamite, that never would have been in the mind of the original author. So to say that the gospel is like dynamite is what's called anachronism. It's to do something chronologically false and out of order. So we want to be careful and let the original meaning dictate what the text means. Another thing, guardrail, is that we don't want to work too hard to try to think about how a word might be made up of components, different words. So for example, butterfly does not mean a combination of butter and a fly, as if you could just get a stick of butter and a fly together, you would know what a butterfly is. That would be to make a major mistake. Similarly, there are a lot of Greek and ancient languages that use words and they're put together as components. Now sometimes that can be extremely helpful. But until you have a good grasp in the original languages, you should stay away from that and let the experts help you understand that. And they will point it out when it's relevant, if you look at a commentary or even some Bible dictionaries. The last thing is that some words mean different things in different cultures. In our modern culture, if you were to talk about Pants in the United States and in England, they would mean different things. In the UK, I won't tell you what it means, but pants means something else. So you want to be sure, if you're in England, to talk about trousers rather than pants, because they don't mean the same thing. Similarly, there might be that there's words that in the original language may mean something different. Or maybe even if you're reading something from 400 years ago, that might mean something different. The last thing I want to say, just as a guardrail, is keep it simple. If you find yourself trying really hard to find this kind of like really complicated, nuanced, very detailed, no one else has ever noticed it before idea, you're probably on the wrong track. People have been doing this for a long time. In fact, if you work too hard to try to make scripture seem something that really isn't there, that's called exegesis. It means to read into or lead into your own meaning into scripture. And we never want to do that. What we want to do is let scripture speak for itself. So the best thing to do is to keep it simple. So just to review, for part one, the basic foundations, make sure that we focus on the original language text. So in the Old Testament, that's going to be Hebrew. In the New Testament, that's going to be Greek. There are a couple places where there's Aramaic, but for now, we're going to leave those aside. Second, we're going to use a quality word-for-word translation, formal equivalence of the English translation. So the ESV or the NASB. Last, the guardrails, the three guardrails to keep you on track is to focus on context, the original meaning, and just keep it simple. This is actually a really fun task to do. I love it. It's one of those things I can just get into and carried away with. But just keep it simple and have fun with it. So I hope those are helpful. I look forward to chatting with you more on part 2 and part 3. But I hope that's been a big help to your ministry. Talk to you later. Thanks.